Good evening. Yesterday we saw about basics of budgeting. Especially we saw the three important accounts we have. Which are Consolidated Fund of India, Contingency Fund of India, Public Account of India. Although I am mentioning it as India, even the state consolidated contingency funds are also there in the same articles 2661, 267, 2662 of part 12. So these are the accounts. On these accounts we are planning. This is called a planning. We may call it as a fiscal planning, financial planning, fiscal planning. As part of planning, you must have heard about 5-year plans or 3 years plans or 7 years plans of Niti Aayog or Planning Commission S12. This is planning. Budget is called a planning, an annual plan. And in this we have understood about budget is having two types of accounts. One is receipts, the other one is expenditure. When we do this expenditure part, when we need to charge from Consolidated Fund of India, there are two types of expenditure. One is voted, the other one is charged. Based on this, from part 5 of Indian Constitution, we have concluded that we have Article 110, 1A Finance Bill, 112 and 113. These are the basic things we have understood. Demand for grants. We have 102 demand for grants and annual financial statement finance bill. Although finance bill includes money bill. This is what we have discussed yesterday. I hope you don't have any doubts as of now. I hope you don't have any doubts as of now. So that is what we understood. Yesterday's documents, I will repeat once again and go back to further the discussion. First one is annual financial statement according to the Constitution 112 and demand for grants according to 113. No demand for grant can be introduced in the House without the permission of the President. It is clear. And I spoke about power and responsibility theory. Based on that, these are deriving power. This is based on the social contract theory, where people vote these people for legislature 5 years once. Finance bill 110A, not completely finance bill. We are talking about taxation. In polity, we have extra articles about financial bills in article 117. In 110, especially we are talking about money bills, especially regarding taxation, we are talking about 110E. So apart from that, in 117, there are two types of financial bills, financial bill 1 and financial bill 2. As I said, in polity, we have different types of bills. One is ordinary bill, the second one is money bill, the third one is finance bill type 1. There are differences in procedures of introducing them and getting assent from the President and constitutional amendment. See, what is the basic difference is that which house is having more power on this, which is having more power on these bills, and what are the powers of President, what are the veto powers of President over these bills. In procedural part, there is quite a difference, and we need to learn that in polity clearly. So this is constitutional mandated. And next, FRBM, as I said, deficits were more during 2000. There was a committee established. What committee? Online students, please tell me which committee was established. according to which FRBM Act 2003 came into picture. Which committee and which is the review committee? E.A. Sharma committee was established in 2000. They gave report in and it became act in 2003, and similarly in 2016 they have given N.K. Singh committee to review FRBM, and they have given targets which are very much important, but these are relevant only for this examination. The final target N.K. Singh gave is for 2023. So post 2023 again we will get one more review committee. If the students are there who are going to give 2024 examination, they might see another review committee. Okay. So this is based on the Parliament Act. We have macroeconomic framework statement. So macroeconomic, the name itself is saying this statement will explain what is happening at the macroeconomic level. They'll talk about macroeconomic parameters like inflation, growth, employment, all these parameters, exports, imports, foreign exchange, all these parameters they will talk about, and they will try to give you a brief gist about Indian economy. If you don't know anything about Indian economy, but you know what are those parameters like national income, inflation and all, if you want to understand, you have to go back to this statement. What is happening in Indian economy at present in the backdrop of Ukraine crisis, right? So in the backdrop of post-COVID scenario, what is happening in India, what exactly is happening in India, you will get it in 2 pages from this particular document, including the numbers, clear-cut numbers, okay. Might be 7 to 8 page document. And medium term fiscal policy fiscal policy strategy statement. As I said, what is going to be your fiscal policy, how is going to be your fiscal prudence maintained, how you are going to maintain your fiscal discipline, how you are going to reduce your deficits and reduce borrowing, how you are going to increase fiscal consolidation, all this will be there in this particular document. In simple, you are going to tell how you are going to reduce the deficits further, how you are going to reduce the debt burden of the country further, okay. So that we will have in this. Apart from that, these are all explanatory documents which we have read yesterday. Expenditure budget, only expenditure part. There are 2 types of expenditures: revenue receipts and revenue budget and capital budget. From revenue budget, revenue expenditure is there. From capital budget, capital expenditure is there. For those students who don't have clarity about that, today I will take up those things, right? Receipt budget, the only receipt side, either it is revenue receipts or capital receipts, only receipt side we will try to get explanation from here. And expenditure profile, so broad, it is more important about expenditure profile. In expenditure also we spend most of the money to social security, so we will try to see how are the expenditure, what is the profile of your expenditure. And budget at a glance for a common man to understand. Memorandum explaining the provisions in the finance bill. Normally an aspirant will not go into all these things. Beyond this you don't have to go, you just have to go see them, but you don't have to remember anything from them. Output outcome monitoring framework. In this you can see different schemes and what are the targets achieved and what are the targets planned to achieve. And key features of budget 23-24, and similarly implementation of budget announcements 2022-23. These are explanatory documents. These are the documents which we have apart from finance minister's budget speech. This is what happened in the yesterday's class. In continuation, for you to understand, all those articles we have covered. So this is what we have discussed. Then I have spoken about annual financial statement. Annual financial statement is a statement of 2661, 2662 and 267. On these 3 accounts we will make this particular statement, that we call it as budget. And we spoke about Consolidated Fund of India, Article 267, and Contingency Fund of India. In Contingency Fund of India we have 30,000 crore corpus. We need to take this based on ex post facto approval. So in Constitution it is mentioned that every year Parliament should conduct at least 2 sessions. Parliament should conduct 2 sessions. It said in a particular sentence that the time gap between 2 sessions should not be more than 6 months. But fortunately, India is conducting 3 sessions. India is conducting 3 sessions. One is budget session, monsoon session and winter session. So if you can see, legislative people will be available only in these sessions. Apart from these sessions, legislative people will not be available. So what if we meet any exigency or emergency when they are not sitting? So executive was given power. Executive was given power over 30,000 crore. We have given power to executive 30,000 crore. Yes, Shubham Rajput, right? 30,000 crore, and they can spend that money during the emergencies like COVID times. Remember, this was increased by Nirmala Sitharaman only after COVID scenario. Before we used to have only 500 crore in contingency fund, but it was increased to 30,000 crore later by Nirmala Sitharaman only after seeing such bio-crisis, right? Next one, we have public account of India. For public account, I've told you the examples: provident funds, small saving collections, receipts of government set apart for expenditure on specific objects such as road development, primary education. There will be different funds like Kisan fund, education fund, women corpus, like that. All those funds which are to be given back to the society for sure are coming into public account of India. So you can see that public account funds that do not belong to the government and have to be finally paid back to the persons and the authorities who deposited them do not require parliamentary authorization for withdrawals. So if you talk about parliamentary authorization, for consolidation prior approval is required. For this it is post approval is required. For here we are saying parliamentary authorization do not require parliamentary authorization for withdrawals. The approval of parliament is obtained when amounts are withdrawn from consolidated fund and kept in public account for expenditure on specific objects. The actual expenditure on the specific object is again submitted for vote in the parliament for withdrawal from public account for incurring expenditure on the specific objects. So initially, as I said, all the monies will go to consolidated fund of India. When the fund is moving from consolidated fund to public account, we take the parliament authorization, right? So it says the union budget can demarcate into part pertaining the revenue which is for reference of revenue budget below, and the part pertaining to capital which is for reference as capital budget. So we are dividing them into, apart from that, the next thing is revenue budget and capital budget. This is the last line about public account. I will repeat once again about public account. The approval of the parliament is obtained when the amounts are withdrawn from consolidated fund and kept in the public account for expenditure on specific objects. The actual expenditure on the specific objects is again submitted for vote of the parliament for withdrawal from the public account for incurring expenditure on specific objects. The union budget can be demarcated. Until here, this is about public account of India. So you need to understand examples of monies kept in public account funds that do not belong to government and have to be finally paid back to the persons and authorities who deposited them do not require parliamentary authorization for withdrawals. So those monies which are kept in public trust need no parliament authorization. If there are any funds we are spending for any particular specific purpose, we are raising it for specific purpose and we are going to spend it for specific purpose, then we take permission when the fund is mobilized from consolidated fund of India to public account. So that part you need to remember. Prior approval is required, post approval is required, and for this mostly approval is not required, but we take approval for specific objectives. So up to that we are clear. So on the process of passing it, it is clear. Yes, Devnath, please tell me. Next one, revenue budget. We are having another set here. We are talking about the revenue budget, then capital budget. So this is where most of the students have doubt. We will try to conclude that. So budget, we divide that into two: revenue budget and capital budget. And again we divide that into receipts and expenditure. In capital also we divide that into receipts and expenditure. Budgeting. So normally budget will have receipts and expenditure, right? This one we have broadened into revenue and capital budgets. In revenue side we again have revenue receipts, revenue expenditure, capital receipts and capital expenditure. This is how we have demarcated them, and what are they in these we will try to understand. Revenue budget consists of revenue receipts of the government, which are tax revenues and non-tax revenues, and the revenue expenditure. So when you see one side, what we have here is in receipts we have example tax receipts, non-tax receipts. Tax receipts like GST, income tax, all these are tax receipts, how the money is coming into the government coffers. Next one, non-tax revenue like the royalties and the amounts which are due for government of India, right? Non-tax revenue. So you can see here revenue receipts of the government, tax revenues and non-tax revenues, and the revenue expenditure. Normally the tax revenues you can see here. Normally tax revenues comprise proceeds of taxes and other duties levied by the union. So tax revenue, taxes by the union, levied by the union. The estimates of revenue receipts shown in the annual financial budget take into account of effect of various taxation proposals made in finance bill. So they are going to make a proposal of finance bill, they are going to propose taxes, and from that taxes how much money they are going to raise. For taxes they are presenting finance bill, how much money they are going to raise in a particular year. That estimate will be presented in revenue receipts. And non-tax receipts of the government mainly consists of interest and dividend on investments made by the government. Fees and other receipts are services rendered by the government. Normally the fees for any services you are taking, any receipts of services, by giving services, if they are taking money, that one consists of interest and dividend on investments. All these coming into revenue receipts as part of non-tax revenue. Remember one principle when you are talking about revenue receipts, the basic difference is assets and liability. Assets and liability. Normally the revenue budget will not create either assets nor liability, but if we go to capital budget, it will create assets or liability. Revenue budget is something where it will not create assets or liability. That is what you need to keep in mind. So apart from that, revenue expenditure. Now you understood tax revenues, non-tax receipts. Now you need to understand revenue expenditure is for the normal running of the government departments and rendering of the various services, making interest payments on debt, meeting subsidies, grants, or broadly the expenditure are the salaries paid to the employees. Expenditure which does not result in creation of assets or liabilities is there in this particular part. Revenue expenditure, it will not create any assets. If it is creating asset, it will become capital expenditure. Keep that in mind. Broadly, the expenditure which does not result in creation of assets, it is treated as revenue expenditure. All grants given to the state governments, union territories and other parties are also treated as revenue expenditure, even though some of the grants may be used for creation of capital assets. Let us understand this. So as I said, there are two types of revenues. One is tax revenue and non-tax revenues. Tax revenues are clear: direct tax, indirect tax. You can go and see what are the different direct taxes once the chapter is completed, that is clear. And non-tax revenues, we just saw the interest received by the government of India, the interest for the loans given, recurrent interest payment will be coming, right? And similarly, the dividends which is received by the government of India, all these are part of this. And if you take revenue expenditure, normally the salaries paid to the government employees or any grants or interest paid. So if you can see, interest paid, interest received is here, interest paid is here. For debt servicing, we call it as debt servicing. For the payment of debt, for the debt, if any interest is paid, that is part of revenue expenditure, which means one part here I have told assets, it will not create any assets, even though it is giving grants. That is where I have to tell you one particular principle. I will tell you that grants, if the grants are given, that is also called revenue expenditure. Now we have revenue budget. There are three terms we can understand: balance budget, surplus, deficit. If the revenue receipts are equal to expenditure, that is called balance, revenue balance budget, right? If the revenue receipts is more than revenue expenditure, that is called revenue surplus. Normally these two things will not happen in India, didn't happen before also. So revenue deficit, our expenditure will be more than our receipts. So this is not good scenario. Revenue receipts cannot be more than revenue receipts. It is not a healthier phenomenon. It is not good fiscal discipline. It is like spending 10 lakhs to recover 1 lakh money given to a person. You have given 1 lakh rupee to a person. To recover that, you have employed 10 people by giving them 1 lakh salary. It is not a good fiscal discipline. It is not good financial discipline. If you are an Indian student, you will know what is financial discipline. If you are a middle class person, you already know what is financial discipline. You don't have to think this is a rocket science to understand. Budgeting is very easy for Indian middle class students. Okay. See here, we always run in deficits, right? Our expenditures are more than always our receipts. The same scenario for the government also. How can the government be different from Indian student, right? So revenue expenditure is more than receipts, that is called revenue deficit. Deficits are good, but revenue deficit is not good. Understand this. If I am spending 1 lakh rupees to buy a house or 10 lakh rupees to buy a house, it is a good expenditure, capital expenditure. But if I am spending 1 lakh rupees on a party, do you think that is a good financial discipline? No. If any expenditure is creating asset, it is fine, you will accept it. But if it is not creating asset, it is revenue, it is recurring, it is not good, right? So revenue budget in revenue deficit is not good, not at all encouraged. Fiscal deficit, or if you take capital in capital budget, all other deficits we can reason it out, but revenue deficit can have no reasons. You should make sure, government should make sure revenue surplus is there. Okay, see here we are spending more money on salaries and grants, right? So but here you need to understand effective revenue deficit. There is a term called effective revenue deficit. This term students don't understand, get confused. What is effective revenue deficit? When receipts are more, when expenditure is more than receipts, that is called deficit. From this, if you are removing any expenditure of grants which have created capital assets, Let us consider, now I have given money to, the union government gave money to Karnataka state. They have given 1 crore money to Karnataka state, let us consider. And Karnataka government spend it on creating capital assets. I'll give you money, what do you do with that money? We don't have any control, but central government is giving some money through which a state government or union territory is creating capital asset. If you remove that from the revenue budget, that is called effective revenue deficit. So as it is a capital budget, right, it is a different term. So what we need to do, revenue deficit minus any grant which had created capital assets, that will become effective revenue deficit. We cannot have asset creation here in the revenue budget, right? We cannot have asset creation. Once again I'll tell you, revenue deficit is equal to, RD is equal to revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts, right? So this is the formula. Now from this, effective revenue deficit is equal to RD revenue deficit minus any money, any grant which had created capital asset. Okay, normally that capital asset will be there in the revenue expenditure. I'll tell you taking an example. So let us consider revenue receipt is, revenue receipts are 10 crores and revenue expenditure is 15 crore. So the deficit is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt, that is 15 minus 10, that is 5 crore. Let us consider. And we have given a grant, of 10 lakhs to state government which had created a capital asset. Let it be road, let it be bridge, let it be a building they have constructed with that money. We need to remove that 10 lakhs from here, which means 4.9 crores will be the effective revenue deficit, which we are removing out, which we are weeding out any capital asset creation from revenue budget. So very important, effective revenue budget and effective capital expenditure, effective capital also, expenditure also we will try to understand. Here we are removing it, that we need to understand. So I hope you understood what is revenue deficit, what is effective revenue deficit. Do you have any doubts here? If you don't have any doubts, I'll go further. Effective revenue deficit clear? Next one, capital budget. In capital budget we have capital receipts and capital expenditure. So what is there in part of capital receipts and what is part of capital expenditure? That is capital budget. That is done. Revenue budget cannot create capital assets. That is the formula. Who is deciding all this? Who is deciding that this particular statement should be like this? There should be revenue budget, in revenue budget interest should be there, dividend should be there. Who is deciding that? Article 150. Article 150 says COG will decide that. Controller Auditor General will decide the form of accounting in India. Normally for state governments and the center also will be decided by COG according to Article 150, because he is the auditor, he has to audit the accounts, so he wanted the way he tells it, right? So according to the Constitution, Article 150, it is the COG. Next one, capital receipts. What is there in capital receipts? Capital receipts and capital payments together constitute capital budget. The capital receipts are loans raised by the government from the public. These are termed as market loans, borrowings by the government through the sale of treasury bills, the loans received by foreign governments and bodies, disinvestment receipts, recovery of loans from state and union territory and other parties. So there are two parts in capital receipts. This is very important because it is little different, students will get confused. All the money which you are borrowing will come into capital receipt. Capital receipts, we are keeping all the money we are borrowing. Let it be we are borrowing from the local market through treasury bills or bonds. Let it be we are borrowing from foreign sovereign states. Let it be we are borrowing from foreign institutional investors or foreign portfolio investors, or let it be the money we are borrowing from your Indians from the Indian market. Anything, it will come into the capital receipts. Similarly, any loans we have given which are paid back by them also come in, sit in capital receipts. Capital receipts are the place where loans which are raised and which are loans which are paid back by the foreign sovereign states or local state governments will come and sit in this particular capital receipts. And if you see, capital receipts are done, any disinvestments also. If you are selling a Vizag Steel, if you are selling LIC, if you are selling any government institution, if you are raising money, that also will come and sit in capital receipts. And capital payments consist of capital expenditure on acquisition of assets. If you are spending money to acquire assets, that is becoming land or building or machinery, equipment, anything like investment or shares, anything, it will become capital expenditure, right? So government companies, government corporations and other parties, all together it will become capital expenditure. So here you can simply say that any money which is creating asset is becoming part of this particular capital expenditure. The difference between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure is that this will create assets, whereas revenue expenditure will not create assets, right? So now here also the same thing. When you have budget, you know balance budget, you know surplus budget, you know deficit budget, right? So if you see capital expenditure here, although we will not focus more on capital budget clearly, but I will tell you effective capital expenditure. Effective capital expenditure. In this capital expenditure, this one plus the one which we have removed in revenue deficit, the expenditure which is creating assets, there we have separated it, right? There we have removed it. We have to add it here. We have to add the grants which will create capital assets. Capital which will create assets or which are part of capital expenditure. If we add that, then it will become effective capital expenditure. Effective revenue deficit and effective capital expenditure are two terminologies which you need to understand. Mostly dynamic, not mentioned in textbooks, regular textbooks. Okay. So this one is clear. Next come account classification. As I said, account classification will be done by COG according to Article 150. Article 150, if you go and see, you will have a clear-cut classification that account classification will be according to the Article 150. Who will decide that? COG will decide that. And annual financial statement, if you remember, I spoke about Article 112(3), where we spoke about the charged expenditure, that is mentioned here. Whose salaries are part of charged expenditure? What is charged expenditure is mentioned here. Okay. So another important thing, as we have come until here, I will tell you simply what is fiscal deficit, what is revenue deficit, what is primary deficit. Revenue deficit, we learned now capital expenditure is greater than capital receipt. When revenue receipts are more, where revenue receipts are less than revenue expenditure, that is becoming revenue deficit. We have learned. What is fiscal deficit? Budget deficit minus borrowings. See, I am telling you an example here for you to understand. The account classification in a way that it will confuse you. I am taking my example. I am getting 10 lakh as receipts. I am having 20 lakh as expenditure. But budget will show receipts also as 20 lakh. It will not show 10 lakh because it will add the borrowings. We saw now in capital receipts it will add the borrowings and show as if these two are the same, because we need to meet the expenditure anyway. You go and get the money from anywhere, it doesn't matter to me. But the account classification shows the receipts and the expenditure. The budget accounting will show in a way that they are maintaining a balance. But unfortunately we have deficits. This 10 lakh money, where this money is coming from? The extra 10 lakh money, receipts is only 10 lakhs, but expenditure is 20 lakh. 10 lakh money, where it is coming from? From the borrowings. Where you are borrowing, it doesn't matter, right? So fiscal deficit is budget deficit minus borrowings, which means it will depict only borrowings. How much money you are borrowing will become fiscal deficit. Here it is 10 lakh. 10 lakh is the money which you are borrowing, that you remember. Fiscal deficit is clearly telling you that the amount of money bought or the amount of money taken as a debt by government of India to meet the present expenditure. Able to understand? Fiscal deficit is the total money which is borrowed by the central government. That we need to keep in mind, fiscal deficit. Okay. So apart from fiscal deficit, we have budget primary deficit. What is this primary deficit? Primary deficit is again the interest payments which we need to pay. Understand, government of India did debt last year also. Last year also. For present year also we need money. But for the money which we borrowed last year, we need to pay interest. For the money we have bought last year, we need to pay interest. That is primary deficit. Interest payments which we need to pay for debt servicing is primary deficits. So if you see the pyramid here, we have the pyramid here. Budget deficit. Budget deficit is directly expenditure minus receipt. Total. What is total expenditure? Capital expenditure plus revenue expenditure is total expenditure. What is total receipts? Revenue receipts plus revenue capital receipts is total receipts. So there are two types of budget we have segregated. We have to bring them together. That is budget deficit. And the second one is fiscal deficit, which will tell you how much money we need to borrow to meet the present expenditure. Okay. And the primary deficit, which clearly will tell you about how much interest payments government has to do. Okay. The magic here is we calculate them as part of GDP. We calculate GDP is the first macroeconomic term we read in economy, and this is the biggest number we have. This is the biggest number we have when we deal Indian economy. So we see everything as part of that. Now I'll tell you an example. According to NK King Review Committee, the target fiscal deficit should be 2.5% of GDP. That should be the target. We see these, we don't see this money. You don't come up and say, sir, 18.7 lakh crore is deficit. People say 2.5% of GDP. What we have, 5% of GDP, like that. We see as part of GDP. Either it is deficit, whether it is debt, everything we always try to see it part of the GDP. Okay, our budget size also. Okay. So these are the basic deficits which we need to see. Although it is not mentioned here, this constitutes the macroeconomic strategy framework which we discuss later. I'll give you a work, go back and learn about zero budget, zero based budgeting and incremental budgeting. I'll repeat once again, go back, read zero based budgeting and incremental budgeting. If you try to differentiate between these two, you will understand another perspective about budgeting. And I've discussed about demand for grants yesterday. Example also, finance bill. As you can see, normally what will be there in FRBM documents? As I said, A.S. Sharma, NK Singh, 2016, 2003, these are the numbers we remember. Macroeconomic framework statement is presented to the Parliament under Section 3 of FRBM Act and rules made thereunder. It contains assessment of growth and economy along with the statement of specific underlying assumptions. It also contains assessment regarding GDP growth rate, domestic economy, stability of external sector, fiscal balance, central government and external sector balance. We call it as current account deficit. All those things we'll read later. All those macroeconomic parameters like GDP, what is employment, how much is inflation, what are the reasons for these things, and how the agriculture sector is there, how the health sector is there, how the industrial infrastructure sector is there, everything within 2 pages. They'll explain everything within 2 pages in this macroeconomic framework statement, so that Aam Admi, the common man, will understand what is the present status of economy. Primary deposit nahi, primary deficit. Primary deficit. Debnath. Primary deficit means the interest payments the government of India has to do. Government of India will borrow the money and it has to pay the interest for that money. That is the primary deficit. For the whole money, how much money they are borrowing, for the interest payment, the interest burden will be, understand, I will try to explain once again the same concept. See, I am doing a business. Let us consider I am doing a business. Always try to correlate things. I am doing a business where I have 30 lakhs expenditure, but I have only 10 lakhs revenue. My business is in loss or profit? It is in loss. Loss of how much? 20 lakhs loss. How much money I have to borrow now? 20 lakhs is the money which I have to borrow to meet my current expenditure, right? That is what fiscal deficit is. Fiscal deficit is the total money which I have to borrow. Understood? And in this 20 lakhs also, there will be some money which I have to pay for the interest which I have taken last year as a loan. I would have taken last year a 10 lakhs loan or 5 lakh loan, for which I need to pay maybe 10,000 rupees interest rate. 10,000 rupees. If I have to pay interest, then if I remove that interest, if I remove the interest I have to pay, understand this, if I remove the borrowings I do, then only I will understand the real picture of the business, right? If I add up and say that my business is like this, in this you understand nothing. 30 lakh is receipt, 30 lakh is expenditure. Bhai, aapka business sahi hai. Your business is going good. Your business is in balance. You are trying to do good. But this is the accounting. Unlike in this accounting, what we have in capital receipts? The borrowings we have. And we need to remove those borrowings. If we remove those borrowings, we will get fiscal deficit. If we remove the interest payments, then we will get the real picture of the business. This is the real picture of the business. To get to this 10 lakh stage, we need to understand how much borrowing we are doing, how much interest payments we are doing. So all the time, what should be your focus in business? I have to facilitate the debt. I have to pay back the debt which I have taken last year or last year. Or let us consider I am doing my family business. I have to pay back all the debt done by my parents. And I have to pay back the debt I have done, the borrowings which I have done. I just wanted to pay back all the money. That should be the business, right? So your facilitating debt should not become major portion of your expenditure. If you are earning 10 lakhs, you cannot spend 9 lakhs on giving back interest payments. Able to understand, this is not a good culture. Understand, you have 1 lakh rupees salary. In 1 lakh, if you are paying 90,000 as the interest which you have taken, it is not good discipline. So all the time we need to reduce the interest burden and the debt burden. So that is the reason why we came up with fiscal deficit and primary deficit. Just remember this, fiscal deficit is the amount, total amount which we need to borrow present year for running the economy, for running the system, government budget. The second one is the interest payments, how much interest payments. When I get into the budget document, you will understand these things clearly. Okay. So that is there as part of this particular macroeconomic framework. Unless you complete these things, you understand nothing. There are many students who are there without learning this also, they are practicing. Understand, if you understand the subject from the core, then only you will be understanding the concept based questions which you are facing in prelims exam. Medium term fiscal policy strategy statement, what we have? Fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit, how much tax revenue is there. As I said, we cannot have revenue deficit. You need to increase your revenues. You need to increase your revenues. And the next one, non-tax revenue. Central government debt. Debt should be reduced. So now the basic question is, are the deficits good or bad? Is fiscal deficit good or bad? Is primary deficit good or bad? Is revenue deficit good or bad? Deficits are good to an extent. Why these are good to an extent? Like inflation. Inflation is good to an extent. The same way deficit. I'll ask you this question. If your mother is not well in house, you don't have any money in your hand, don't you borrow? Borrowing is compulsory. You will borrow, right? So here fiscal deficit is something we are borrowing money, and we have problems like unemployment, we have problems like poverty, we have problems like gender inequality. When these problems are persisting, fiscal deficit is fine, primary deficit is fine, borrowing is fine. But remember, there is a limit for borrowing. In the name of the mother, in the name of these parameters, you cannot borrow without any discipline, right? You should borrow in a way that you have that repayment capability. You cannot borrow more than you are capable of, right? Fiscal discipline, that is where we call it as fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation, debt servicing, these are the terms which we need to remember. Fiscal deficit is fine, primary deficit is fine, but revenue deficit is not acceptable. We don't accept revenue deficit. Devnath, thank you. We don't accept revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is lack of discipline. When your revenue receipts are less and revenue expenditure is more, it is like your salary is 25,000, but you are spending on luxury for 50,000. Your salary is 25,000. You are going in car, you are coming in car, you are spending on pizzas, you are throwing parties to friends. This is not good discipline. Revenue deficit is not at all acceptable, but fiscal deficit and primary deficits are acceptable when the money is spent for social sector. Here, unlike your business, where when you invest, there are parameters through which you can quantify your profit. But here there are sectors where you spend money and you don't know how to quantify that benefit. For example, now I have 1 lakh rupees. I can spend 1 lakh rupees for throwing a party to a friend and giving 1 lakh rupees for a education of a child. Education of a child, which is good. The same way, social sector is very important. Welfare burden is there. We are spending money on social sector, but how do you quantify? How do you quantify that? You cannot quantify it. In capital expenditure, you cannot quantify. That is the reason why we don't focus more on capital budget there. But it is important, when you are spending money, the money should be more capital expenditure, less revenue expenditure. These are basic fiscal discipline. You don't need any book to understand this. You just need the budget website and your basic understanding. Okay. If you have joined UPSC guide course, obviously you are a middle class student seeing for some quality within affordable pricing, which means the same budget you will understand clearly. Okay. So these are there in this particular strategy statement. In this strategy statement, they will try to tell, this is my target. In the next 2 years, these are going to be my borrowings. This is going to be my debt. This is how I am going to reduce my interest burden. You should be able to tell. A father will ask the son, son, you are making so much of debt. How we are going to reduce the debt burden? Then the son will say, Papa, in this year I am going to raise my income level. Next year I am going to construct a particular commercial complex. Then next year I am going to invest on this. From this I will get this money, I will facilitate that. The same way, when you are doing debt, you have to give an explanation to the legislature. Who is planning the budget? Executive. And to whom they are telling this? Legislature. And the legislature will tell to the people. Executive is responsible to the legislature. There is collective responsibility of executive to the Lok Sabha. Okay. So this is what we talk about the budget. And explanatory documents, we have expenditure budget and we have receipt budget. There is nothing much where you can learn from here. We only see and learn. So I will keep these explanatory documents pending for the last class. I will go ahead with other documents like macroeconomic framework, budget highlights and all those things. I want you to do one thing. Download this document of budget speech of Nirmala Sitharaman. Open budget video in YouTube. Open that video, listen to that video, keep that document, see that document and hear her listen to her what she is telling. Try to underline important points. Only budget speech. I hope I gave you a basic perspective of budget. When we try to get into the highlights, we will understand more. For the basic student, it is easy to understand till now, and if you don't know the basics, it will be little difficult to understand later. Okay. So today I will take up one more issue for your understanding and wind up this session. The point which I am going to end up here is very important. Focus on this. Remember this. Where do the government earns money from? We are trying to see the share of revenues. Where the government of India getting money from? As I said, borrowings. Can you see 34% of the money is from borrowings. Borrowings and other liabilities. And non-tax receipts is 6%. And non-debt capital receipts is 2%. Customs 4%. Customs, GST, corporation, union excise, this is all tax revenue. This is all tax revenue. That is borrowing. That is non-tax revenue. So income tax is 15%. Union excise is 7. Corporation is 15. Can you see? Income tax and corporation tax is same. But see the GST numbers. That is the reason why they are thumping the hearts. Here you can see GST is 17%. GST is their own innovation. This present government's innovation. So 17%. And non-tax receipts is 6%. Very minuscule. And customs is 4%. This is where the money is coming from, tax sources and non-tax revenues. Non-debt capital receipts is where it is not part of borrowing. Capital receipts but not part of borrowing. The money which we are receiving, let us consider the amount which we have given, right? So non-debt capital receipts, the money which the government of India is receiving, right, without incurring any liability. That is non-debt capital receipts. But just remember these things. Which is major one? Borrowings is major, GST is second, income tax, and similarly your corporation tax, and similarly union excise duties, customs is 4%, non-tax is 2, non-debt capital receipts is 2%, non-tax is 6%. So if the money is coming from those roads where the money is being spent, this you need to remember for sure, there is no exemption. Where the money is going to? Interest payments. How much money it is going? Understand why I discussed about that deficit. 20% of the money is going to interest payments. Central sponsored schemes 9%. Central sector schemes 17%, if you can see, right? And similarly state share of taxes and duties, Finance Commission, Article 280, Finance Commission transfers and state share of tax duties, both based on Finance Commission. We will discuss about Finance Commission later. So state share of taxes and duties and Finance Commission and other transfers, state share is 18%, interest payments is 20%, schemes it is almost 26% together, central sector and central sponsored schemes. And defense, it is 8%, 8% is going for defense. Normally in developed countries it would be around 15%. People will increase their defense if they are developed countries because they have more assets, they have to protect better. And subsidies 7%, and you can see pensions is 4, other expenditure is 8%. This is where the money is going to, right? Where the money is coming from, where the money is going to, right? Most of the money is coming from there. Also you see 34% is coming from borrowings, 20% is going to interest payments. Now you will understand the importance of fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit, all those things you will understand. All right. So I hope you understood what we have discussed today. We'll try to continue the session with budget highlights again tomorrow. As I said, it is easy for me to complete budget in 1 hour, but I don't want to do that. I want to extend small sessions of budget so that you will understand, dilute and digest the information which I have given to you, come back with the concept so that we'll discuss. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see once again tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Shubham Rajput.